1, 2, 3, test. Yes. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the NIAS opening of the academic year 2022-23. Today we celebrate a new academic year and we welcome our new fellows. We are here today at the Trippenhuis, the headquarters of the Royal Academy of Arts and Science. And I'm very happy that you're all here. I'm also very happy that people are watching from home. I heard there's again a lot of traffic jams with the public transport and so ever. So I'm very happy that you all made it here. We have prepared if I may say so myself, a wonderful program. And I am going to introduce the speakers in a minute. But before I do, I want to say a little bit about the fellows group, because I think it's going to be a very special year. There are fellows from over 17 countries joining us at NIAS this year, working in even more different disciplines, in the humanities, in the social science, in the arts, and even in the hard sciences. We're very happy you found us and that we can provide you with time and space to work on your projects. During today's opening, you might have guessed it from the earlier slide, we are going to talk about one of NIA's core activities, interdisciplinarity, and more specifically, the practices of interdisciplinarity. So not so much what is it, but how does it work out in practice? I'm going to stop talking because I just keep rambling on. Willem is going to do an opening speech in a bit. Before he does, I want to invite Marileen Dogterom to the stage. She is the super fresh new president of the Royal Academy of the Royal Academy of Arts and Science.
It's already 3 months, so it still feels very fresh. Thank you very much. Welcome to our house. It was already mentioned, the Trippenhuis. It's home of the Royal Academy of Arts and Sciences, where, as it was already mentioned, we are celebrating the opening of the new academic year with the NIAS, the Netherlands Institute for Advanced Study in the Humanities and Social Sciences. And I would like to thank the director, Professor Willem Duyvendak, for asking me to speak a few welcoming words. A special welcome, of course, I don't know if you're all here, but to this year's fellows, I wish you a very fruitful and inspiring time here in Amsterdam. Being a fresh president, I actually had the pleasure to visiting NIAS myself last week for the first time. And I was very impressed by the tranquil environment that the Institute has managed to create right in the heart of this not-so-tranquil city. So I hope you'll enjoy both. I'm looking forward also to getting to know some of you through the program of today. And to give you a little bit of background about the Academy, we bring together scholars, scientists from all disciplines, unlike some other countries. So we are organized around 4 domains: social sciences, humanities, the medical sciences, and the natural and technical sciences. We are also responsible for 10 research institutes in the life sciences, social sciences, and humanities, and home, very importantly, I think, to the Young Academy and the Academie van Kunsten, our Society of Arts. And together, we provide advice to our government. And among other things, there's many activities. We organize interdisciplinary events as much as possible to inform the public, for example, about developments in science. So today, the topic is Practices of Interdisciplinarity. And I was actually asked to reflect on this interdisciplinarity within the social sciences and humanities, which is the focus of today, taking into my account my own background, which is in the natural sciences. So maybe I thought the best thing to do is just start with my own experience in interdisciplinary research. I was educated in theoretical physics in Groningen, the University of Groningen, but moved right away towards experimental biophysics during my PhD and postdoctoral years. And this actually happened in the 90s, almost 30 years ago. And this was a time when there was a lot of excitement among physicists because of the technical capabilities that had just become available to study and manipulate individual biological molecules. I can some other day tell you a lot more about that, but maybe not today. And I entered in this field, and then in the years after, I got the opportunity to start a new interdisciplinary research group at the then FOM Institute Aanhof, also here in Amsterdam. And I have to say I'm very grateful for the, without any doubt, very generous opportunities given to me at the time. But interestingly, I also went through endless discussions, they've now gone away a little bit, with colleagues and maybe more importantly funding agencies about whether what I was doing was physics, biology, maybe even chemistry, and if I was interested in solving biological problems, how would this bring the field of physics any further? And, so I had all kinds of good answers to that, of course. So depending on the label of the funding scheme, I had to argue in different ways. Not so much about what discoveries I was hoping to make, but which field I was going to advance. And I'm not complaining because it all happened in a time where things were actually changing in my field. And like I said, I really had a lot of opportunities to develop this interdisciplinary research, but the discussion was always there, and sometimes is still always there. But of course, living cells, the topic of my study, they're still relatively poorly understood today. They do not care about the fact that we have divided the academic research into disciplines. They operate based on principles from all these disciplines, and when trying to discover how cells work, you better combine the expertise from scientists with different backgrounds. This is not to say that disciplinary expertise is not useful. It's actually very useful. Different perspectives on a complex problem brought in by scientists with different backgrounds is extremely valuable. And I also don't think that interdisciplinarity is a goal in itself. There are many interesting problems that are perfectly suited to consider within just a single discipline. Which brings me to the social sciences and humanities, not my background. But it must be true that in general the same applies. When considering complex problems related to society and human behavior, it must be true that different perspectives offered by different disciplines are necessary to advance our understanding. Even more when considering the highly complex challenges our society is facing today, and I'm sure you will hear more about it later today, we do need perspectives from social sciences, from humanities, natural, medical, technical sciences, and also the arts, I'm really convinced. And an obvious example, of course, is the transition our society will need to go through in response to the current climate crisis and maybe other crises. So it's exactly for that reason that NWO, our funding agency in The Hague, and our academy are working very hard to set up a national initiative around this theme of climate that brings together, and that's explicitly what it aims to do, scientists from all disciplines. Well, given that you intend to reflect on this theme much more this afternoon, I will keep my introduction very short. Maybe finish, if you allow me, with a quote from Willem Frederik Hermans, our famous writer, and who, as the experts may know, also had a PhD in the natural sciences. And the reason is that last week I had the pleasure of being part of a ceremony in the Nieuwe Kerk here in Amsterdam, where the 21st and 24th and last volume of his complete works were presented, a project that was worked on for 17 years by scientists from our IISG, our Institute for Dutch History and Culture. So the quote that I didn't find myself, but that was suggested to me then, and that I will repeat today, comes from his book, Nooit meer slapen. It reads as follows, and I apologize, I didn't dare to translate any of this in English, so it's in Dutch. It says, wat is wetenschap? Wetenschap is de titanische poging van het menselijk intellect zich uit zijn kosmische isolement te verlossen door te begrijpen. Well, with big words like these, it seems unlikely that understanding of anything will be possible, considering knowledge from just one discipline. So welcome again, and I wish you a good conference.
Thank you, Marileen. That was a very, very good start. And yeah, lots to think about. Without further ado, the director of NIAS, Willem Duyvendak.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Marileen. A very warm welcome to NIAS, obviously, for the new fellow group. And this afternoon, also a warm welcome to our partners, alumni, colleagues of the Humanities Cluster, the Netherlands Royal Academy of Arts and Sciences, everyone else in this room, and also those watching online. Today's opening ceremony is themed Practices of Interdisciplinarity. It's important to reflect on the promises and pitfalls of interdisciplinarity. What is it, and why has it become such a buzzword? Is it something good, maybe even something necessary to practice, at least to get grants, for instance? That is different from the past, I do realize now, yeah. Today, I will share some observations with you regarding aspects of interdisciplinarity that you will see coming back in the other contributions this afternoon. Fellows at NIAS have always practiced interdisciplinarity. We learned from our book. Last year, we published the book NIAS 50 Years of Academic Freedom. And NIAS did that even in those days, those mostly monodisciplinary times in the past. Interdisciplinarity at NIAS had not just been about crossing boundaries within and across the social sciences and the humanities, but also somewhat about working together with scholars of the hard sciences. Even though beta fellows have always been a rather small group, but for a very bad but practical reason, that is just because there are so few places like NIAS for scholars working in the humanities and social sciences. But obviously that's not a good reason. Moreover, we have had interdisciplinary programs meant to bridge the gap between the arts and sciences. These days, we welcome not just academic scholars, but also artists, writers, and journalists. NIAS is part of a larger network of institutes for advanced study, and for many decades, institutes for advanced study were rather unique given their emphasis on interdisciplinarity. However, the gap in terms of practice of interdisciplinarity has decreased between NIAS and the universities. Interdisciplinarity is now a buzzword everywhere. This is fascinating, because in many other aspects, the difference between NIAS on the one hand and the rest of academia, Dutch academia on the other hand, has increased in recent years. Because we aim to foster curiosity, the practice of slow science, and to promote collaborative learning instead of competition, while universities seems to have become, at least for some, a publish or perish rat race, particularly for early career researchers. NIAS' various interdisciplinary ambitions show that interdisciplinarity is not one thing. As our new cohort of fellows will experience during their stay, fruitful exchanges can mean various things. From very substantial comments given by colleagues who are relatively close to your topic, via more general remarks concerning your epistemological assumptions and the methodology used, to reflections regarding one's writing style or other novel, totally unexpected comments. This in itself implies that there is not one answer to the questions of why and when and how to practice interdisciplinarity. It depends on with whom you work and what your ambitions are. But given that you are in various ways such a highly diverse group, the outcome of your interdisciplinary encounters at NIAS will also be diverse. But these conversations will almost always be highly productive, as we have experienced over the past 50 years. What we consider as interdisciplinarity obviously also depends on what we consider as sitting within disciplinary boundaries. what we consider as normal for a field. And interestingly, that has changed enormously. And let me just give one example. Whereas not that long ago, big data were perceived as outside the humanities, and therefore a reason to speak about interdisciplinary cooperation between the sciences and humanities, today many, if not most humanities projects actually have a component of digital humanities. Big data being part of the discipline, has become part of the discipline. So we can see the dynamic process of boundary making and unmaking in action here. I'm very much aware that many institutions, such as the Dutch Research Council, NWO, express their enthusiasm for interdisciplinarity in rather pragmatic terms. Today's challenges, such as climate change, are so complex and all-encompassing that interdisciplinary cooperation is considered a necessity to find solutions. However, this does raise the question whether today's challenges are really of a different order, a different kind than before. Is interdisciplinarity more needed now than in the past? If the constellation of interdisciplinarity is never the same twice, given the changing internal logic of disciplines and the changing nature of our societal and academic problems, is it then even still possible to define repeatable conditions for making interdisciplinarity work? On a slightly less ambitious scale, can we ever precisely define the role interdisciplinarity plays when trying to understand why one NIAS seminar was highly successful and another slightly less? I don't pose these questions because I think that interdisciplinary research is always inherently better. Not at all. But how can we know that we practice and when we practice, how can we do that in the most successful ways? As you see, more questions than answers from my side. I'm looking to hearing from all of you about these questions in the coming month and from some of you in the coming hour. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jan Willem. For the next part of today's program, we move on to a few special guests that are well acquainted with NIAS already. We are about to start a short video by Antal van den Bos. He was the the Meertens Institute Director until a week ago, and he just started as Professor of Language, Communication and Computation at Utrecht University. He couldn't make it today, so he sent us a short clip.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk about practices of interdisciplinarity with this video, as I cannot be present today. Language is a covariate of culture, history, and social structures. Language is social cultural data. Language comes in endless varieties, registers, genres, and in linguistic jargon, lects, sociolects, dialects, and the idiolect, the language unique to a single individual. Communication, such as required in good scientific collaborations, but also nearly anywhere else in life, occurs only if some part of language is shared among the communicators, only if there is common ground to build on. In order to collaborate, you need to have some common language. Next to my background as a linguist, I double as a computer scientist. One of the attractions of computer science is that it has devised its own completely non-messy way of communication, programming languages. Now, the computer has played an intriguing role in academia over the past 70 years. Practically all fields of scholarly and scientific research areas have started to use the computer at some point. Computational linguistics, computational chemistry, digital humanities, bioinformatics. The list is as long as research goes. Although many of these computational subdisciplines have their own independent history, at many points, and increasingly so, they have discovered that they, as a set of subdisciplines with very different mother domains, have a powerful common ground through which they can communicate fine. often better than with their mother domains. The common ground is, again, programming languages and the underpinnings of computer science, mathematics, statistics, and logic. This non-messy, exact, formal basis is fertile ground for interdisciplinary research. From this ground, much innovation sprouts. Recently, for example, researchers from the Meertens Institute, Antwerp University, and a number of other medievists throughout Europe published an article in Science about the statistics of lost books. Can we estimate the number of manuscripts that have been lost through time based on the observations of manuscripts that did manage to remain unburned, intact in libraries? They teamed up with Anne Chow, an internationally recognized ecological statistician who has developed computational models for estimating numbers of unseen species of living beings based on ecological fieldwork data. This is just one example about which I'm obviously biased and proud of establishing an interdisciplinary collaboration based on the common ground of crisp and clear computational modeling. Similar examples abound, and before the age of computers, mathematics and logic already played these conducive roles, of course. It is easy to dismiss computational modeling as being somewhat of a nerd thing that cannot transpose easily to other more complex, ephemeral, non-computational interdisciplinary playing grounds. Yet, I would like to challenge you to think about imitating what computational researchers do. Find a common formal ground, ask a question from the one domain, and use a modeling method from the other to answer it. Formalization, making things concrete, bounded, countable, etc., is never the end and may only be a temporary stepping stone, but it can be a powerful means. I wish you a great discussion today and a fruitful NIAS academic year, and to leave you with a bit of final news from my last days as director of Meertens Institute. NIAS and Meertens will be teaming up for NIAS Meertens Fellowships as an addition to the NIAS Fellows program. With the Meertens Institute literally next door, the Institute is looking forward to strengthen its ties with NIAS, and dedicated fellowships are the ultimate way to make this wish come true. Watch the announcements. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antal. Strange to thank someone who isn't here. I think Antal raised some interesting questions that could come up during our next part of today's opening event. I want to invite Bernieke Pasveer, Head of Academic Affairs at NIAS, and Tamar de Waal and Lucas Verburg to the stage. Before you come, I want to say a little bit about who you are, because it might be nice for everyone to know. Tamar and Lucas were both former fellows at NIAS last year. Tamar is Assistant Professor of Legal Theory at the University of Amsterdam, and she was an Urban Citizen Fellow, so we team up with the Municipality of Amsterdam. And Lucas is currently still working at NIAS, I guess we can say, as a research and project associate. But next to that, he's also a Gerda Henkel Stiftung research scholar. And, fun fact, he was recently appointed as fellow at the Royal Historical Society. During their fellowships, Tamar and Lucas, and maybe also Bernieke, started talking about what is interdisciplinarity and how do the seminars, the weekly seminars, provide interdisciplinarity. So today they are going to continue that conversation, and they are going to talk about what interdisciplinarity mean for an institution or an institute such as NIAS. The chairs are yours.
We each have our own microphone. Nice to see everyone. Tamar and Lucas, it's nice that we're here as former fellows last autumn. I wasn't involved in the conversation about interdisciplinarity, but I come from a very interdisciplinary faculty which was raised and built in Maastricht, the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. So interdisciplinarity is in its building blocks of. So interdisciplinarity, as we heard from Jan Willem's speech, and also it's a buzzword. It is very much something NIAS self-identifies with, in a sense. Still, you thought last autumn it merits further attention and articulation and unpacking. So Tamara, say a bit about what made you do that.
Yeah, so I guess that we just started talking about it after we've been at NIAS for a couple of weeks. And as you just said, Bernieke, NIAS self-identifies as being an interdisciplinary institute. And we were wondering, because, that implies a lot of questions, of course. The first one is, what is interdisciplinarity exactly? Is it expected from us? Is it something that NIAS is promoting, providing, makes easier? Is the idea that we have a certain shared product at the end? And also, Sarah also mentioned the seminars. So for the new fellows, you probably already know, but there are a lot of afternoon seminars, and all fellows discuss their research there. And we wondered, is it enough to just put a lot of different scientists in one room with different academic backgrounds, or is more needed to have a truly interdisciplinary exchange? So that's why we actually also sent an email about it, that we wanted to organize a conversation about this. So that was the motivation, I think.
Yeah, so it's nice that you already mentioned this sort of, that's also what struck me, this sort of idea that when you put a lot of people from various disciplinary backgrounds together, then you sort of, by magic, become an interdisciplinary community. Can you say a bit more about, Lucas, do you think this is so, or do you think, or did you think it requires something else? Or more?
Well, maybe I can say, to follow up on that, a little bit more about sort of how this started, because I agree with what Tamar said, but I remember that in the first few weeks that I was at NIAS, I was also applying for a job at the Utrecht University, and it was an interdisciplinary or liberal arts and sciences, interdisciplinary program, and I was quite struck by the fact that in order to go to the interview there, I had to read articles and sort of, like 100 or 200 pages of work on how can we make interdisciplinarity work for students. So I just found out that there was this entire body of literature on how to promote interdisciplinarity, case studies, theoretical reflections when it came to educational context. So this made me wonder, okay, isn't this something that should also be provided on a level of research and institutes like NIAS? So is there sort of theoretical work or that we can learn from to improve the practices of interdisciplinarity at NIAS? And of course, so this is something that we can come back to later perhaps, what NIAS's role perhaps in doing this is. But our more modest idea in the beginning was to think, okay, you have all these cohorts of fellows that come here every year. They have to reinvent the NIAS wheel of interdisciplinarity. Wouldn't it be good or a good idea to, come up with some sort of NIAS, not rules, but sort of golden standard of how to do interdisciplinarity at NIAS? And of course, there are no standards, no formal rules, but I think everyone who has been a fellow at NIAS knows that, as Jan Willem also said, sometimes it works better and sometimes it works slightly less good. So isn't there a learning process that we need to go through that we can benefit from? So that's sort of another part of the background.
So let's move on from there, because Jan Willem also said that interdisciplinarity is not a magic that makes everything, that solves all problems. So let's try to be a bit more specific. So when do you think interdisciplinarity or an interdisciplinary approach or collaboration, or when would it be interesting, and what would it what would it require? We'll talk about that later. When would it be interesting to do something in an interdisciplinary way, assuming that this is not always a solution or an option or interesting in the first place. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I think, again, that there are two questions then. So the first question is, why would you do interdisciplinary research or cooperation in general? And what would that actually imply for NIAS? So I think the first question was already discussed by the previous speaker as well, that there are certain societal problems or issues that simply cannot be understood from one discipline, that you need the different disciplines to understand them, or say more about them at least. What it implies for NIAS, well, I think it's nuanced in the sense that I'm not sure whether Lucas and I fully agree on this, but I think there might be reason to consider for NIAS not to say it is an interdisciplinary institute. I remember that Willem told me that when he became director of NIAS, its tagline was, "Here useless knowledge is produced." And I remember that he said, well, that was one of the first things I changed. I don't think that interdisciplinarity is as a self-identifying or a promotional word is as problematic, but there might be reason to say maybe it should not be our main goal to be interdisciplinary. So there may be aspects at NIAS, the theme groups, for instance, and maybe the seminars too, because there we try to bring disciplines together. But we're individual fellows, and we have our own projects in principle. So there's no reason to say that it's a fully interdisciplinary institute.
But because that's the question. When then would it be interesting? In what kinds of problems? Lucas can say what kinds of situations, problems, whatever, might bring interdisciplinarity into view.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I think strikes every reader of research that is being done on interdisciplinarity is sort of an answer to your question. It all depends. There's no generic answer to when interdisciplinarity works or not, but I think on the level of NIAS, so to come back to our possible disagreement, I sort of came to think of NIAS, and I think this is more than a semantic issue. I think NIAS is a sort of multidisciplinary institute where more disciplines come together. I think it has an interdisciplinary ambition, and I think, in a sense, it should have what is sometimes called a transdisciplinary conscious. So with this last motive, I mean that part of NIAS, and this is also apparent today, of course, is to accept interdisciplinarity as a sort of, as a problematics, as something that cannot be solved, as is not a ready-made answer, but something that you constantly have to reflect on, have to, learn from others, learn from other disciplines. So when it comes to when does interdisciplinarity work or when is it needed, again, I think the answer is it all depends, because, to give one example, if you read the research and the sort of the reports that are being written on this, it all depends, for example, whether you see interdisciplinarity as a goal in itself or as a means. And I think the tendency is to think of interdisciplinarity as a means towards a certain end, namely more innovative knowledge that is directly applicable to solve or fix societal problems, etc. But perhaps for NIAS, a bit against the tide is to embrace it as a goal in itself, namely interdisciplinarity as a cultivation of a certain attitude or certain skills that you can cultivate. Namely going beyond your disciplinary boundaries and sort of straddling this field of your own, the things you don't know, and sort of things that someone from another discipline doesn't know, and to learn how to dwell in this place. And I think that NIAS has an important role to play there.
That's nice. But I was going to, because Marileen has left, this when does interdisciplinarity matter? It's nice the things that you say, but sometimes it's the idea is that today's the given problems of today are so complex that you can't manage them monodisciplinarity. disciplinarily. Whereas previously problems weren't so complex. So you could easily do that in monodisciplinary ways. This means that we think the problems are given and that we can just look at them. And the question, of course, is, I've always thought of interdisciplinarity also as something of a disruptive force, because it's about, that's what scientists do, making problems, defining what you want to look at and in what way. So how do you and this obnoxiousness, potentially, of interdisciplinarity by creating problems or describing problems in ways that differ from the default and thus indeed, what do you think of that? Because that's an epistemological thing, not about collaboration, but really about thinking of, so how can you make problems that need an interdisciplinary approach? And when would you want to do that?
Well, I fully agree with you with what you just said, and I often also think that if we read reports or statements about interdisciplinarity, they're often overly rosy about that we just sit together, look at the same problem, and then we get further than if we would have done it alone. While our methodologies might clash, and also certain disciplines are maybe more implicitly but heavily ideological too. So it's just that you see that there are actually also a lot of normative assumptions behind certain questions or research approaches that might actually be very difficult to combine, or that it would basically mean that somebody should let go of certain attitudes or a way of approaching things that researcher finds very important. Mm-hmm. So I would definitely say that it's not as simple as simply sitting together and looking at new problems. I also agree that I don't think that the world has become more complex in the sense that interdisciplinarity was not needed before and now it is. I think that's also an oversimplification. But also, if I can make it a bit more concrete, again for NIAS with the seminars, which I think are important for NIAS. They have a social role, but they also ask a lot of time of the fellows, sometimes twice, 2 afternoons in 1 week, or only the Thursdays. And of course, there's always the value of serendipity. So you can just hope that as long as you just talk with a lot of different scientists and suddenly somebody asks a question or says, oh, I have this book or this argument and it just fits your research project perfectly, and then that's true. And that can be amazing. So I don't want to underestimate the power of that. But I think to really have an interdisciplinary exchange requires us to know a bit more about each other's work then, and also it requires us to reframe our own presentations. You really have to think about what are the terms that I use that are maybe not well known. I remember that I gave my presentation, and I'm a legal philosopher, and I used the word liberal democracy. And one of the, I believe her background was in language development. She asked me, why do you use the word liberal all the time? She thought it was about a certain political, like the VVD in the Netherlands, like the Liberal Party. So she really, and I realized then that she probably did not understand at all what I was trying to question. So yeah, it's a bit of a long answer, but I think it has many layers, and that interdisciplinary takes a lot of work, and that you eventually also do not know whether it will be successful.
Yeah. I know that to hear from Lucas also a little bit. Do we still have a bit of time? Because I wanted to end with talking about what we can do at NIAS to engender more interdisciplinarity encounters, if that's valued. Just to hear from you, because I know you've also been working on a very complex today's problem called the Anthropocene, which is one of the things that we say, well, you know, today everything has become so complex that we need. How do you think about this issue of when the interdisciplinarity, and is interdisciplinarity needed because things have become more complex, or can it also be a disruptive force or something activist, probably even? Probably you're not the right person to ask.
Well, I don't know. Well, sort of in light of this discussion, it's interesting that when it comes to the Anthropocene, the sort of the main word that is being used is multidisciplinary.
Yep.
So multidisciplinary approach. But yeah, I think one of the things that becomes most obvious when you look at the Anthropocene and sort of this committee that has been established, sort of formed to establish whether the Anthropocene is our new geological epoch, consisting of many different disciplines, leads to a lot of frustration, a lot of clashes, a lot of, well, I wouldn't say fights, but, almost. Should social scientists be involved in determining whether humanity has entered a new geological epoch?
Of course.
Well, some sociologists then say, of course we need to be involved, and others say, who cares about geological epochs? We do sociological research, etc. So I think, in a sense, I agree with what you say, so it can be very disruptive, and with what Tamar says, that the picture that's being created of interdisciplinarity is this very rosy way of doing research, whereas research, of course, oftentimes, even within disciplines, people, if you put 10 philosophers in a room, it's not as if they all agree and they can work together without any problems with people from other disciplines. So I think there are a lot of, well, as I said before, interdisciplinarity really asks us to cultivate, so as I referred to in the beginning, there are now interdisciplinary programs for students, and you can ask a lot of critical questions about that. But there you have this really refined work of asking, okay, how does this work? How do you cultivate this? And I think also on the level of more advanced researchers, this is something that is worth asking.
We have 2 more minutes, so
Yeah.
I still want to talk about NIAS a bit.
So when it comes to NIAS, this is why I have this paper in front of me. I just wanted to read 2 quotes from recent reports on interdisciplinarity. So the first one is from AYA, which is an Amsterdam-based sort of think tank. And they say every interdisciplinary collaboration is different, so it is impossible to create a canonical guide to interdisciplinarity. So that means, well, we cannot say anything about it in a sense. But then the AWTI, which is also a Dutch organization, says unclarity over what interdisciplinarity means hampers progress. So we need to know what it is and how to cultivate it in order to develop it in a critical way. And then, and this is the last quote, and then I make the link to NIAS, the ERC, so the European body, said, we need to promote interdisciplinarity as a discipline. And this is, I think, ERC, you can be suspicious, but I think this is quite interesting, because if you look at interdisciplinarity research, this is organized in a very disciplinary way. Yeah. So if you look at the Oxford Handbook of Interdisciplinarity, you have physicists talking about interdisciplinarity, social scientists, etc. So to think about how you can study interdisciplinarity in an interdisciplinary way, I think this is, well, perhaps a possible role for NIAS that you can
So the
create.
2 of you, just very quickly, how does NIAS, what can NIAS do to practice its interdisciplinary ambitions differently than it already does? Very quickly, Lucas.
Well, I think it already does a good job on many levels. I think the theme groups, of course, are sort of where, in some cases, interdisciplinarity, in a sort of the way we think of it now, really happens, because this is where people from different disciplines come together to create a certain interdisciplinary product or outcome. But I think also, so this follows up on what I just said, NIAS can take up a sort of the long-term role of developing a sort of critical thinking about what interdisciplinarity is. So it could also take a role as a research institute in asking exactly the questions that we are discussing today. So maybe this is a nice start to do that. What is interdisciplinarity? When does it work? How can we cultivate it? And how can we develop it, not only as a means to a certain instrumental end, but also as a goal in itself for junior and senior researchers?
Yeah, without the rosiness.
Yeah, very
just
shortly.
2 sentences. Yeah.
So with the risk to repeating myself, I would say NIAS could celebrate interdisciplinarity and really welcome it as something that might occur, maybe a side product of other research projects that take place at NIAS. But I am not sure whether it should promote itself as an interdisciplinary institute, because it's such a valuable institute as a safe haven for academics that finally have time to finish some work, that it might, I would say, should focus on that instead of saying there's actually also some interdisciplinarity expected or part of our raison d'être.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's hope the best of the coming semester, and it is on the agenda. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It is on the agenda indeed, because we encourage you all to join us during the academic year to continue the conversation. We are going to organize a few meetings, gatherings, conversations, however you want to call it, with the fellows, with people from outside the institute, and you're all very welcome to join. Before we move to the final part of the program, I want to introduce another guest, Arjen Doelman, because it came up during the interview as well. NIAS hosts a lot of theme groups, or a few theme groups each year, and one of the theme groups is organized together with our partner, the Lorentz Center, which is a workshop center at Leiden University, and they host all kinds of international workshops and scientific meetings. They celebrate 25 years of existence this year, and we are also very happy to finally be able to say in public, or that we also celebrate 10 years of partnership this year. So it's a happy year. Before I go on, Arjen, it's all yours.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm a mathematician, and unlike most of my colleagues, I'm very pragmatic. So I realized that I used the word multidisciplinary in my title, and Lucas made it very clear that there is something like interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity. For this talk, I don't make any distinctions. Maybe I should have used interdisciplinarity there. I'm also not going to give you a very, say, precise quantitative point of view looking at 25 years of Lorentz Center, and I thought it was already much more than 10 years, by the way. We started in 2006.
I think you're better in the know than I am.
Yeah. So, but that's so we started to talk to work together a long time ago. I'm director of the Lorentz Center for 12 years now, so I've seen a number of things. So this trends and evolution of multidisciplinary science is mostly my personal point of view, and it might be very biased. So I apologize for that. On the other hand, I'm not going to say things that are very new to what has already been said today. So in that sense, there's nothing surprising coming on. What I like is this is our very first Lorentz NIAS workshop, Geometric Patterns in Islamic Art, and that was 2006. And Othering and Polarization was the most recent NIAS Lorentz workshop. And there are a lot of them in between. And they already tell a little bit the story I want to tell. So this is completely known to you now, and I'm not claiming that Wim Blokmans was director, or I think it was called rector by that time, of the NIAS in 2006. Wim van Saarloos was director of the Lorentz Center in 2006. They started to say, we need to come together because Lorentz was typically the sciences, NIAS is the art and humanities, social sciences, and these boundaries are moving anyway, and it's very unproductive to not work together. That was their statement. 5 years later, Aafke Hulk took over from Wim Blokmans. I had taken over from Wim van Saarloos. And what we wrote over there is what we've already heard a couple of times today. The real problems of societies facing today cannot be solved by one discipline. People have to work together. We were not the first to say things like that, but we're certainly not the last. And if you ask so the question is, trends in evolution? Is there a trend in evolution? We're already saying the same thing for decades. So this is more or less my main conclusion, similar to the response of science and society to climate change. It's already known for decades that climate is going to change. It started out in small groups, and there was a lot of debate, but in the essence of the message didn't change. Climate will change. And it trickled down from, say, the pure researchers to society. But in essence, it started with the trailblazers and it spread out to a larger community. I'm not claiming that either one of us were really trailblazers, but the process is very similar to, as far as I can see, 30 years ago or 50 years ago, people started to say, these boundaries are not always productive. By the way, I completely also think that monodisciplinarity or useless science is crucial also to the Lorentz Center. So let's not have this discussion here. But this or interdisciplinarity has become something bigger and more important through the years. Didn't anything change? Well, yes, because the way I look at it, it started more top-down. It were universities thinking about these things, or leaders in the field. We should cross disciplines. And these days we had a very nice meeting in Haarlem at the Koninklijke Hollandse Maatschappij der Wetenschappen. Of course, partly organized by Jan Willem and me, but mostly by Louise Gunning. And one of the things, the same conclusion came out. Nothing really changed in 30 years. Except for the fact that it was brought in by Hester Bijl, the rector of my university. Yeah, but students, they don't care. Students, they don't care whether they will have to pursue their career either in the faculty of social sciences or the faculty of science. They are just interested in stuff and they're going to combine things. So what we see is that the younger generation, and I can say these things these days, I'm a little bit older myself, they don't worry about this has been going already for decades. I am a mathematician, I work on ecosystems, I have students who say, well, I'm a mathematician, but I want to do something for the planet. Can I start working with you on ecosystem collapse? So there is a bottom-up, growing, at least what I see, interest in, yes, we want to do something for these big problems, so we need to combine things, and I don't worry whether I will be later have a career in a math department or an ecology department. That's, I think, the bottom-up process, which is so important to the Lorentz Center, is getting stronger and stronger. But some things did change. One of the important things, and this is also, we started, this is also something that's popular and important within NWO, our National Science Foundation. It's the occurrence of team science. If you, the philosophy of the information and computing sciences was our very first distinguished Lorentz Fellow, so that's a NIAS Lorentz Fellow, and that's a workshop organized by one person. And that's, I think we don't even allow it any longer at the Lorentz Center. Things are organized by groups, and the other poster, the other workshop is our latest workshop organized by the theme group. So that's a group of young people, and they organize a meeting. So what we've seen is that, and that's also related to this bottom-up, top-down, we used to start out with more like senior people that said, well, let's step into another discipline. And now these days, it's coming from, I'm coming from this discipline, I'm coming from this, let's do something together. And that's what we see as a change in our program. Another thing is, and that's, I try to explain that as, scientists are also part of society. So as I just told my students, they're mathematicians, but they also see biodiversity collapse. So they say, can I do something? And once again, also still, I mean, this, the philosophy of computer science was a hugely successful, useless workshop, but it was the seed to a completely new field. We're very proud of that. But what we see as an evolution And that's also related to the very first slide. I think I should be able to go back. Patterns in Islamic art versus othering and polarization. There is a trend towards multi-interdisciplinary workshops that are more directly relevant to society. And nobody tells us, scientists, to do so, but as scientists we are part of society. And that's also this bottom-up. We would like to do more things. So this is, the other workshop is on language development for your kids. Very interdisciplinary and very relevant. Another thing is, and that was already mentioned by Marileen, openness to other disciplines. It used to be the response, what does physics learn? What do we get as new physics theory when you're going to do biology? Arrogance, especially in the hard sciences, as Sarah used to call it. Wow, take this book, you might find something useful for you. That has changed. Not always. It has changed also. Everybody, you might have something new for me. I'm interested to I talk to a social scientist because I might need to develop new physics. And another one is multidisciplinarity within disciplines, is that we see at the Lorentz Center, even at a very monodisciplinary workshop, we bring together theoreticians, experimenters, and computational people. Also at that level, we bring together people with different viewpoints. And that's really a change we have seen through the years. Finally, coming to also the observation of Jan Willem, there's a very important catalyst, what we call the computational sciences. And it's not only so that every field does big data these days. It's more than that, I think. If you look at our program, the green line of the number of workshops per year has been going up last couple of years, and we put a lot of energy in that, as Jan Willem. But also the orange line of the computational science has gone up as fast as the NIAS Lorentz workshops by itself. And it's intrinsically multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and it's big data. The astronomers were already handling big data much bigger than we see now these days in medical science for decades. So what we saw is that astronomers are starting to talk to social scientists and medical scientists to bring across their techniques to handle big data. And that's not only big data, also scientific computing. Coming back again to my own story, I'm studying ecosystem collapse. Scientific computing is the hardcore computing you use for climate science. We bring in techniques developed by physicists in fluid dynamics. They are so good at doing scientific computations that we use them for their ecosystem collapse. So this entire field of computer science, scientific computer, data science, AI, machine learning, whatever you want to call it, is a bridge between disciplines. It is, in the words of Antal, it is a language that we can use both from the side of, say, astronomy and from the side of medical science. And that bridges groups. And that's what I've seen, say, as I look at our program, we see more and more of these bridges between fields through these, say, computational fields. And this is the last, this is a workshop running now at this very moment at the Lorentz Center. This is centered around a group at the eScience Center. So these are eScience engineers. They are good at AI, explainable AI, and they're now having a workshop on predicting the success of harvests, local forecasting, harvesting, based on climate change, things like that. And it's a very interdisciplinary workshop, but it's the eScience engineers core that's driving it. So this is the story I would like to tell.
Thank you, Arjen. Now for something completely different. We're moving towards the part where we introduce our new fellows, or at least a few of them. For those of you who are not coming to stage today, we'll see you tomorrow. It's a random selection, so there's no favors here. First, Michael Tedja. I'm really happy that you're here. Michael Tedja is our writer in residence. He's a writer, a poet, a painter, a curator. I think he's a homo universalis. And during his fellowship, he's going to write on a new novel called Dat is dat ding, or in English you would say That is that thing, in which he investigates the history of his artistically creative family. He's going to read an essay now that, if I'm correct, was published earlier this summer in Dutch in NRC, a Dutch newspaper. But you'll be able to say more about it than I do.
So, I talk from a painter, a writer, and an art curator's point of view. So there you have it, interdisciplinarity. This is a short version of my essay that is published in the newspaper NRC about 2 weeks ago. So I have 10 minutes to read tonight, so I will read just a part of the essay called Make Policies for the Arts and Not for Political Arts Agendas, or even better, we need policies supporting art, not politicized arts agendas. A long time ago, blacks were the problem children of society, who required more attention and support than other groups. Blacks were to be pitied, were poor and neglected. That was a problem to be tackled by lending a helping hand, out of charity, solidarity and self-satisfaction. Many blacks were okay with the situation. As long as someone else tells me what I am and what I should do and who I am and gives me money for it, I am somebody, I could hear them think. Luckily, there have been intelligent blacks who have resisted this racism of the helping hand, which in fact accomplished nothing apart from making the black community feel inferior and the white elite feel superior. This is what I want to discuss because I can hardly stand the poverty, or rather the lack of discernment in contemporary art. Black artists are lumped together, as if we are not individuals distinct from each other. The worst part of this is that we are being reduced to the bloodlines we originate from, instead of being asked what we want with our art. Is it the intention that the so-called Black Dutch returns to the place where he came from? Should he be in the same place, on the same ground where his parents were born, or he himself to truly know and understand who he is? This is a repulsive idea. Museum directors, curators, and art historians who can only approach the art when the artist explicitly discusses his roots make a serious conceptual error. In doing so, they posit that work by black writers and artists living and working in the West is a copy of Western thought. Western thought is not an entity that is self-contained. They simply cannot maintain that anything that is made here in the Netherlands is self-evident and authentic. Much of what is here is built and founded on what has been conceived, made, and designed in other cultures. The idea that black writers and artists should go home, back home, to discover their own strength is nonsensical. For the supposed authenticity of the white community is in no way a given. In essence, all good art is concerned with human suffering that is not directly bound to any particular language, culture, or geographical divide. I am a painter, my background is important. In order to perceive myself from a distance, that background is just as important as the paint I use to make a painting. When the colors interact with each other, I go deeper, a sort of intellectual shadow play, like dark and light on the canvas of imagination, layer upon layer in such a way that each painted layer must first have dried and hardened before the next one can carefully be applied on top of it. My art is generated as I go along, opening up discussions about authenticity in society through it. I'm strict, or better yet, I'm very demanding. My art is about the meaning of the autonomous image in the present day. In my art, I focus on the language of the emancipated, on who independently takes position against all politically correct violence from the black and the white community. I avoid the one-dimensional character of a political art, which is often inclined to instrumentalize. Among other things, I am careful of an art world which wants to spin everything around by deleting parts from my personal history. It reduces that personal history to identity politics, and that is not the foundation of my work. I want to be able to establish links between complex issues by exposing the frizz of art, the cross-pollination that is the basic cultural form supporting all contemporary art. A writer can write about communities in need of protection. I write about a society that is subject to constant change and that is in intense development. What matters to me is how the story is told. Through my work, I criticize the systematic categorization of human beings. The literary world and the art world are pragmatic by nature. This double framework, art and life, can be a paradox. A writer, an artist, needs his spirituality to be able to create. That is the first requirement. You can't conjure up powerful images, tell intelligent stories, and make a contribution that makes sense if your foundation is conditional and unstable. Some artists politicize the identity crisis they experience to lend their work and sense of home a certain authenticity. I don't. This politically correct framework I fill with politically incorrect contents. My art is of a metaphorical nature, and it is constantly in motion, zigzagging across the terrain of the future Netherlands, a country that, in my opinion, is already composed of different colors. Each color has a complementary color to itself. The sharper the contrast between the colors, the higher the tension, the larger the distance that needs to be bridged. It is the duty of the writer and the artist to choose with certainty for uncertainty in a time when it seems people are being pitted against each other. As an art curator, I'm analyzing these phrases. I would say that this is a poetic discourse. Being black, white, green, yellow, purple, or blue is a poetic discourse. Dealing with your own color, with the many colors surrounding you, is a color study, like a painting project, which develops through mixing, sanding, covering, retouching, thickening, carving, manipulating, and exploring. Making art is also an intellectual game. It is not my intention to create purely black and white people through it. That is a contradiction. That is opposed to the delicate sense of shape, the conceptual game that develops slowly over time and shows that you can better see it like this. It is best when all colors are in friction with each other and/or are mixed together in order to enhance each other in the most effective way. I analyze and see a mix of contradictions, paradoxes, and fixations. But when I say, as a cosmopolitan, that I'm black because my father and mother originate from Suriname, then that is because society puts me in that frame. Or they call you a hybrid, a term that implies a lack of purity. From there, it quickly becomes race politics. Who is pure and who not? I choose black, white, green, blue, red and gray, but most of all, wisdom. We ourselves determine the colors we take on and nobody else. Everyone can decide for himself what is more important, recognition through identification by perfectly fitting in the presupposed frames, or to opt for a less secure form by choosing the perfect imperfection, that devilish art that could not care less about conventions, which recognizes no front or back, left or right, up or down, but things like the sea, flowing in the interspaces and fluiding the key with content. As a member of the Academy of the Arts, I recently received a letter of principles written by the Undersecretary of Education, Culture and Science, G. Oesloe, to the President of the House of Representatives of the States General. She writes, among other things, "You can get a new perspective on the world or on your own life by experiencing a performance, by visiting an iconic building, an exhibition, by watching a movie, or in other moments when culture enriches our lives. Culture enables recognition and shows the differences between people. But to what extent and how are the differences between all people and all artists secured in art today? When the Undersecretary speaks of people, I assume she means all people. How can she explain that, according to policy, part of the Dutch artist is viewed as black? I think I know how. The fear for the loss of control is the engine behind this fixation on pigmentation. For me, there is one constant factor in every story I read or write, and in every painting I see or make. I want to recognize myself within the metaphorical memory of the wherever-born artist.
Thought-provoking piece. With that, we move on to the 5 last speakers. Bear with us, please, of today's opening. 5 fellows are going to briefly pitch some of their thoughts, experiences, practices of interdisciplinarity. We start off with Abosede George. She is the Tau Associate Professor of History at Barnard College and Columbia University in New York. And she teaches courses in urban history, the history of childhood and youth in Africa, the study of women, gender, and sexuality in African history. Welcome, and here you go.
Good evening, everyone. In this conversation on interdisciplinarity, I want to spotlight the work of LSA, also known as the Lagos Studies Association, a space for exploration in Lagos. The association was founded in 2017 following an interdisciplinary conference on Lagos that was convened at Barnard College in 2016. And working with 2 other historians, my colleagues Sahid Aderinto and Ademide Adelusi, the Barnard Conference brought together about 80 scholars from diverse fields based in the US and Nigeria to critically engage Lagos and each other at a women's college in New York. On so many levels, it was a very stimulating and fruitful gathering. But without a doubt, the most important thing that resulted from it was that we listened to the challenges that our Nigeria-based colleagues faced in being at such gatherings, and we decided along with them to collaborate on a meeting for the following year, this time to be held in Lagos. What was the purpose of this? First, the 3 organizers wanted to be in sustained and meaningful collaboration with Lagos Studies colleagues in Nigeria. Secondly, it was very important to us that the conference should be accessible to Nigeria-based scholars, geographically, financially, particularly junior scholars and graduate students. So global travel barriers, as we know, disproportionately affecting African travelers, have made the question of where major African studies conferences are held into an urgent political and ethical issue. Since Lagos is a crossroads for Lagos scholars, it seemed logical to make Lagos itself a meeting point for this scholarly community. Third, we wanted a meeting not only of academics, we wanted to have deeper and sustained conversations with artists and policymakers and practitioners and other kinds of knowledge producers that were based in Lagos. So since our first meeting in 2017 in Lagos, since our first Lagos meeting, the LSA has held an international interdisciplinary conference every year that seems to double in size each time that we meet. We've brought hundreds of scholars, artists, practitioners, activists, even traditional rulers, some of which you saw, into open conversation. And members come to Lagos from across the continent, from North America, Europe, and Asia, for 3 days of sustained exchange, preceded by a 3-day professionalization workshop for advanced PhD students and for junior scholars working in Nigerian universities. It's a week-long happening, and as you can see, it's always very exciting. Curating interdisciplinarity into the LSA is more of an art than a science. Can I say that? It's a cliche, and it involves 3 key dimensions for us. One is refusing a town versus gown divide in our imagination of who is the knowledge producer. 2 is opening up the conference to various modes of presentation and various modes of assembling a conference. And then 3 is maintaining a consistency of community engagement so that non-academics colleagues could feel genuinely a part of this knowledge community. There are some challenges, of course, to such an expansive vision. however, and I'll just name 3. One is the challenge of managing hierarchies within the community, hierarchies grounded in seniority, in cultural differences, and of course in differential access to resources. Second challenge is one of engaging with each other's works across different ways of knowing, in ways that feel productive to the goals of the individuals who are bringing their work, and also feel safe for junior scholars who might be worried about their ideas being stolen, which is a problem. And the third thing is the challenge of defining our limits while trying to foster a very expansive and capacious community. I will wrap up by saying that the LSA is really exciting. It's exciting for me because we get to explore these difficulties related to interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, multiplicities, and not just on our own panels, but with our demanding and diverse audience. It is precisely the effort of trying to curate such a space of exploration, particularly in a city like Lagos, that I think has infused my work, at least, with higher levels of rigor and creativity and accountability. And I think that has extended those qualities even to the African studies field beyond. Thank you.
So much, and this is good inspiration for the conference we are organizing in April. Next up is Davida Grossi. He is associate professor at both University of Groningen and here in Amsterdam, the University of Amsterdam, working in the fields of artificial intelligence, logic, language, computation, law, whatnot. And here at NIAS, he's going to be part of the NIAS Lorentz theme group, where he will explore how we can develop digital democracy algorithms that we can trust to be truly democratic. Davida.
Thanks for picking a picture from a few years ago. That was. In my pitch, I will actually pick up on observation that also my colleagues already made, that interdisciplinarity is actually not really just a rosy endeavor. So I'm indeed a computer scientist, and I collaborate a lot with legal scientists, economists, social scientists. And well, that's wonderful, but it also generates a lot of frustration. So let me see. Yes, and I will use pictures to illustrate this frustration. So, sometimes we are confronted with ideas that don't quite make sense to you when you work with scientists and scholars in other domains. You're confronted with methodologies that generate insights that may look quite daunting, that you don't really grasp, and you have to sort of trust to work. Often you work with co-authors, you may have to write papers, but they try to pull in a completely different directions of where you would like to go to accomplish what you're after. And critically, you have to deal with funding agencies. They love interdisciplinarity on paper, but the way in which they assess interdisciplinarity is such that often you just get a blank screen when you propose your projects to them. So yes, I practice interdisciplinarity, but very often you think, why cannot I just fly back to my monodiscipline and this quiet nest where I could study little teeny tiny computational problems and it all ends there just fine. But actually, of course, if you can take a step back and you look at it in all these hurdles, well, you recognize a beautiful sort of chaos out there. That's why I love doing interdisciplinary research, because you have to jump all these hurdles. And in the end, I think interdisciplinarity to me is, the core of it is really learning to live with this sort of colorful chaos, and just be at peace with it. That is, sometimes you cannot really just grasp the whole thing, and that's where your colleagues are there for. And this is, by the way, a mural from Keith Haring, made in 1990, in an improbable city. For those of you that know the work of Keith Haring, that's Pisa in Italy, and it's called Tutto Mondo, so the whole world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next guest is not physically here, but she's joining us via Zoom. Suzanne Sridar is professor of philosophy and women's gender and sexuality. Wow, here there's an interesting sentence that I cannot read exactly. She is, at least what I can say, the director of the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies program at Boston University. And her research focuses on early modern political thought. She will be a second semester fellow. That's why she's joining us here on Zoom. And it's great to have her here this way. Suzanne, I hope you're here.
Yes, I'm here.
Fantastic. Here you go.
Thank you. So hi, everyone. Greetings from Boston. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this opening ceremony. I've really enjoyed it so far, and it's given me a much better idea of what the NIAS experience will be like, even though I won't be there until 2023. So I'm excited to come next semester as part of a theme group that's called Political Theories of Involuntary Servitude within Europe from 1600 to 1850. Our theme group is undeniably multidisciplinary. I'm a philosopher. I'm in a philosophy department, and the other participants in the group come from political science and law. What brings us together is an interest in the history of political thought in Europe at a very specific time. Philosophy, my home discipline, is not known for being particularly open to interdisciplinary work, and it's rare to have an opportunity to work in a meaningful way with faculty from other departments. So what does interdisciplinarity mean in the study of the history of political philosophy? Well, we're all studying the same authors and the same texts, right? So the scholars in various disciplines, in philosophy, political science, history, literature, who are looking at the same source material. The figure that I work on primarily is 17th century English philosopher Thomas Hobbes, one of the forefathers of modern liberalism. And he has been carefully researched by scholars in all of these different fields. Moreover, because my current project is on gender in the philosophy of Thomas Hobbes, and I'm interested in how Hobbes views women, I also have to engage with scholars from various gender studies, sexuality studies, feminist studies departments. So what have I learned from other disciplines in my current project? A lot, actually. So even though I'm a philosopher and Thomas Hobbes was a philosopher, most of the best work that's done on Hobbes, and especially on Hobbes, on the problem of gender, has been done by people outside of philosophy departments. So to give you just a quick example of how I use the scholarship of people in other disciplines in my work, there should be a picture of the front cover of Hobbes's, there it is, of Hobbes's most famous work. This is Leviathan, published in 1651, forefather of social contract theory. And this is the frontispiece of Leviathan. It's the front cover art that he had a hand in designing. So one of the most important pieces of evidence for my reading of Hobbes comes from, again, not a philosopher, a man named Quentin Skinner, who's a professor of history at Queen Mary University of London. Quentin Skinner has written extensively on the Leviathan frontispiece, which depicts Hobbes's political theory as a king whose body is made up of his subjects, and it's actually, his body is made up of armor that's composed of the back of subjects' heads as they look up at their sovereign in awe, and this is supposed to encapsulate Hobbes's political philosophy. So Quentin Skinner points out that half of the people in the armor that make up the body of the king here are wearing women's bonnets, which I had no idea before I read his book. Obviously, this is a kind of crucial piece of evidence for those who are interested in figuring out how gender played a role in this foundational work of Western thought. And importantly, though, it's not a piece of evidence from the written text, which is what I'm used to working with. And a philosopher was simply not going to do the kind of research necessary to identify the headwear depicted on the front cover of the book. I mean, I wouldn't know how to do that kind of research. That is not how I'm trained. So drawing on the research of scholars in other disciplines has been vital to my own work. And that's one example of how that interdisciplinarity has helped me. What are the challenges? People have mentioned many of them already. And I want to pick up on something that somebody said before about clashing methodologies. So I take it the methodology of analytic philosophy, which is my training, is that of argument reconstruction. And that is not shared by scholars. That methodology is not shared by scholars in other disciplines who are also researching the philosophy of Thomas Hobbes. My interpretations of the text aim to make his thought as kind of logically consistent and coherent as possible, whereas scholars in other disciplines might have other goals. They might want to locate the manuscript in its historical context. They might want to reveal the subtext. And the different goals have yielded different and opposing interpretations. And that has been the source, as somebody else has said, of many frustrations, because we're interpreting the same text, but we interpret it radically differently because we have these different methodologies. And it's not clear to me how to go about adjudicating the interpretive disputes because we're coming at the problem so differently. And one of the things that I'm hoping to get out of my experience at NIAS is to have the kinds of conversations that would be models for how people negotiate clashing methodologies from various disciplines. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Suzanne, for being with us this way. The next speaker is Sony Mumbunan. He is the lead environmental economist and research associate at the World Resources Institute in Indonesia. And he is also a researcher at the Research Center for Climate Change at the University of Indonesia. And for the next coming 5 months, he's part of what I think is super exciting interdisciplinary theme group that will study climate change and governance in both Indonesia and the Caribbean. Sony, where are you? Come up.
So that was a picture of a younger me. Oop. Thank you. So I'll use the 3 minutes given. What is my thought as an environmental economist on how research is linked to practices of interdisciplinarity? The answer is very challenging, and I have 2 reasons for that. One, because of different, even contradicting epistemics. The second one, because of the theme of interest that the organizer picked. It's about establishing linkages that is linking to climate change, or what we call, something like safe operating space for humanity. Let me address these 2 points one by one and at the same time. We have possibly noticed this picture. What do you see? A 9 or an 8? You are right, it is a 9 and an 8. So depending on the eye of the beholder, 6. A 9 and a 6, yeah. I'm a bit nervous because of the rehearsal and stuff. Yeah. Okay, let me continue. So it depends on the eye of the beholder, depending on how one positions oneself, depending on perspective, depending on epistemics. So it's not that you are right and I'm wrong. It can also be that you don't see that I'm right from the way I'm seeing at it, and the other way around. So it applies both ways to the other eyes. And here we see the first challenge, one of 2 challenges that I would like to address. Such differences in perspective and epistemic imply that different opinions, ideas, approaches are equally legitimate. This is not the typical difference as we know it, between disciplines. I remember my presentation University of Indonesia recently, where a professor of economics asking why the Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Sciences is doing research on universal basic income for nature and climate. That's not really the thing that I would like to address here. Not that this is not also about what's so-called false equivalence, either, where very expert and expert are treated alike, as we know it. What I'm going to try to address here is about equivalences, where, as implied in the first one, all legitimate. Now let's move to the second challenge, and you may also have probably watched this movie at Netflix, Don't Look Up. Just for a background, this is a movie about a comet identified with some certainty heading for Earth and finally hit the Earth. Above we see two scientists, a senior one, like most of you, and a PhD student on the first row, and a scientist in the policy arena representing NASA. Below is a president and presidential aide, and an artist, a celebrity whose love story is the talk of the social media world. These represent all truths, and they're equally legitimate. They have their own perspective, epistemics, about what is the most important pressing issue. These explain their thinking and, in turn, their action, their inaction, or something in between to an issue. Now, what do you think? Which one is the most important issue then? If you look at this picture, all of them will be hit by the comet, or a warming world due to climate change, or pandemic due to land use change, or biodiversity loss. Now, how to link these two in terms of practice of interdisciplinarity? To be very honest and blunt, I don't know. This is very challenging, very difficult. Interdisciplinary is about integrating knowledge and methods from different disciplines, approaches, epistemics, with the hope of approaching things as a synthesis. But I have an experience of working with two Indonesian presidents at the president's office, the past one and the current one. So we are forced to always come up with something very concrete. So if I'm pressed to come up with this or something very concrete by organizer, I would like to quote the director of NIAS, printed on the information booklet for NIAS fellows you have with you. What is it? Forget H index. Just forget it. That's the first prerequisite. And what we need to do is just start to really think, really reflect on what is at stake, and be humble, so that one can see the big interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary picture, because the comet heading toward the Earth, or warming planet, losing biodiversity, you name it, doesn't seem to care about disciplinarity of science, of our social position. Thank you.
Thank you, Sony. Our final speaker today is Aniek de Ruiter. She works in health, law, and policy at the University of Amsterdam, where she's founding director of the Law Center for Health and Life. During her full-year fellowship, if I'm right, so she will be here until June, she will investigate the EU constitutional framework for health emergencies. I think we have to think of COVID kind of situations. Anyways, Aniek, the stage is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. About 3 weeks ago, I took my kids to the thrift store, and we really like doing that because what they usually do, and what we did this time too, is they look for a puzzle. And so we found a puzzle of a castle. We took it home. It wasn't that expensive, as you can understand. And we took it home, we put a big board on our table, and they just started working. They started puzzling. And this is really, this kind of messy puzzle is also the picture that comes to my mind when I think about the practice of interdisciplinarity. Because what is really its use? It's been actually around for about 100 years. We've been putting money, we've been putting time, institutional efforts into creating interdisciplinarity. And what comes out is often, as many of you have already said, multidisciplinarity. So I'm on the board of the Amsterdam Institute for Global Health and Development, where we work with around 50 researchers, and there's virologists there, there is epidemiologists, medical biologists, lawyers, development economists. We're all working together, and we all meet on every Friday. We come together, we share concepts, we try to understand each other, look at each other's perspectives, we build consortia, we try to come up with new methodologies. We're doing it all. And then, as a board member, by the end of the year, we look at our output, and we look at our publications. And what I usually see is that we still publish mostly in monodisciplinary journals, also because those are most of the journals that are still around. Also, our institutions are still largely monodisciplinary. And even the career tracks of the researchers that are working with us, their projected career tracks are often geared towards one discipline. So now I'm looking at my kids laying this puzzle, and they're talking to each other, they're finding a piece, great piece that, his brother is actually working on an area of that piece, so he gives the piece, you should put it there, that has the same color. And they find that in the end, actually, when they lay the whole puzzle, there's many pieces that are missing, right? I mean, it's to be expected. So what was really the use of putting down this whole puzzle and then finding out that it really wasn't going to be complete? I could have probably predicted it going to a thrift store, getting a €1 puzzle for them. But it didn't really matter, because in the end, what was important was the process of laying down this puzzle together. And I think the same goes for interdisciplinary practice. And what makes it such a worthwhile endeavor for over these 100 years. It's really, I think, that the practice itself is its purpose. Because yes, we do it because we aim to broaden and deepen our scientific findings. But in the process, what we really gain is the perspective of where the gaps are, and we also figure out the limitations of our own discipline.
Thank you so much, Aniek. That was a wonderful way to end this event. Quite hopeful, I would say. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts. I hope I don't forget anyone. I want to thank our speakers, Marileen, Willem, Aniek, Abosede, Davida, Sony, Suzanne, Bernieke, Antal, Arjen, Michael. I've got them all. Tamar, Lucas. Yes. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for watching from home. I think it's time for a borrel.